All right, so are you ready to do a deep dive? Today we are going to unpack the world of Elvis Presley.
The king.
The king of rock and roll. Exactly. We're going to figure out why he's more than just a name or a catchy tune.
Right.
Elvis's story is about the American dream, the birth of rock and roll, and this huge cultural impact that we can still feel today.
Absolutely.
And I think it's going to be a really interesting one to unpack. So we have a ton of sources that we're going to go through today.
Okay.
Articles, biographies, even some cultural critiques to really understand Elvis.
Awesome.
But before we get into all of that, can you remind me what was going on in America when Elvis kind of burst onto the scene?
So think back to 1935, the Great Depression.
Oh, yeah.
Elvis is born in Tupelo, Mississippi, in a 2-room house.
Wow.
Poverty was just a fact of life for so many people.
Right.
Opportunity seemed really scarce.
So a classic underdog story.
Yeah.
But how does that kid from, such humble beginnings become Elvis Presley, a global phenomenon?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting when you mix personal drive and cultural context.
Uh-huh.
Growing up, Elvis was exposed to gospel,
Okay.
country blues music, all kind of available to him in the South.
Yeah.
This fusion of sounds really becomes a key ingredient in his music.
I've always wondered, was he intentionally trying to blend those genres, or did it just kind of naturally come out that way?
That is a question that music historians debate.
Okay.
Some people believe that he was really consciously bridging musical divides, especially at a time when racial segregation was so entrenched in the United States.
Right.
Others argue it was a more organic blend that just reflected his influences.
Uh-huh.
But either way, it tapped into something really powerful.
Okay. It did.
So let's zoom in on a particular year, 1954.
Okay.
Sun Studios in Memphis.
Yes.
Elvis record. That's all right.
Huge.
Why is that moment considered such a big deal?
So up until that point, popular music was pretty tame.
Okay.
It often catered to older audiences.
Right. Then Elvis comes along with all this raw energy, this blend of country twang and rhythm and blues swagger, and a voice that just dripped with charisma. It was like a bolt of energy straight into the heart of youth culture.
So it wasn't just the song itself, it was his whole performance style.
Exactly.
Right.
And his performances were electrifying.
Yeah.
And some would say scandalous.
Oh, yeah.
Elvis the Pelvis wasn't just a catchy phrase.
Right.
It was a reflection of how his hip movements actually shocked a lot of people at the time.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine now, but it was seen as incredibly provocative.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wild how what's considered shocking changes so much over time.
I know.
But that must have added to his appeal, right?
Yeah.
Breaking those norms and kind of pushing the boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was the embodiment of rebellion, challenging both musical and social conventions.
Uh-huh.
And for young people, that was just incredibly alluring.
Yeah.
It's that combo of talent, timing, and audacity that helped launch the rock and roll revolution.
So we've got Elvis, this kid from poverty exploding onto the scene, breaking musical and social boundaries.
Right.
But his impact was way bigger than just music.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
He wasn't just a musician.
Okay.
He was a cultural force.
Yeah.
His influence extended to fashion, entertainment, and even the way that people thought about race and identity.
Wow. So let's break that down a bit.
Sure.
You mentioned that he broke down racial barriers.
Yes.
How did that happen specifically through his music?
So remember, this is the 1950s.
Okay.
Segregation was still the law of the land in many parts of the U.S.
Right.
Black artists were often marginalized.
Uh-huh.
Their music wasn't played on mainstream radio.
Okay.
But Elvis openly embraced and incorporated elements of black music into his sound.
So in a way, he was introducing white audiences to the sounds of black culture.
You could say that, yeah. And while there's a lot of debate about cultural appropriation and Elvis's role in that,
Right.
there's no denying that his music helped expose a wider audience to the rhythms and blues and gospel traditions that had been largely ignored by mainstream white America.
So it wasn't just Elvis being talented, it was him being a conduit for these different musical worlds to collide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that collision
Yeah.
created something completely new and exciting, something that resonated with people across racial lines.
Right.
It was like a spark that ignited a cultural wildfire.
Wow. So much happened in just those first few years of his career.
It did. It happened quickly.
It sounds like Elvis's impact was as much about social and cultural context as it was about his talent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that cultural movements are rarely created by individuals alone.
Right.
It's about the convergence of talent, timing, and, societal forces that are ripe for change.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground already. We've seen Elvis rise from humble beginnings, kind of explode onto the music scene and become this cultural force.
Yeah.
But we're just getting started.
I know, right?
We'll be right back to explore more of Elvis's impact and legacy.
Elvis's story is really a window into how America was changing in the mid-20th century.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this wasn't just about music.
Mm-hmm.
This was about young people finding a voice
Okay.
and pushing back against the norms of their parents' generation.
So it's like he was the soundtrack to a cultural rebellion.
Exactly.
Okay.
And, it wasn't always welcomed with open arms.
Right.
Older generations saw him as a threat to decency, like a symbol of everything they feared about changing values.
Yeah.
There were even attempts to censor his music and his performances.
Yeah, I can imagine those, famous hip movements
Right.
didn't exactly win over the conservative crowd.
Not at all.
But that controversy must have only fueled his popularity even more among young people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It reinforced that idea that he was dangerous, different, and willing to challenge the status quo.
It's like a little bit bad boyish.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that rebellious spirit also came through in his fashion, right?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, those gold lammy suits
No.
and that pompadour hair. It was like a visual, middle finger to conformity.
His style choices were incredibly deliberate.
Okay.
It was about creating this persona
Yeah.
that was just larger than life, a symbol of individuality and defiance.
Uh-huh.
And it had a huge impact on fashion trends at the time.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Suddenly, young people everywhere wanted to emulate Elvis's look.
That's so interesting how fashion can be such a powerful tool
I know, right?
for self-expression and cultural change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Elvis understood.
Uh-huh.
He wasn't just wearing clothes, he was making a statement.
And he didn't limit himself to music and fashion.
Okay.
He went on to conquer movies and television as well.
He was a true multimedia star.
Right.
His movies might seem like a little formulaic by today's standards,
Yeah.
but they were incredibly popular at the time.
Okay.
And they allowed him to reach an even wider audience
Right.
and further solidify his image
Yeah.
as this global icon.
It's almost like he was the prototype for the modern celebrity.
You could say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he helped to establish the blueprint for how to build a career that transcended a single art form.
Mm-hmm.
He was a musician, an actor, a style icon. He was everywhere.
He was Elvis.
Yeah,
But even kings have their struggles.
it's true.
Elvis's later years were marked by some personal challenges, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
The constant pressure of fame, the grueling touring schedule,
Right.
and some personal demons that he battled, it all took a toll.
Uh-huh.
He struggled with addiction, and his health declined.
Is there a sense that he was trying to maintain this image
Oh, yeah.
of being larger than life,
I mean,
even when things were maybe difficult behind the scenes?
I think that's part of it.
Okay.
The pressure to maintain that persona,
Yeah.
to always be Elvis,
Right.
it must have been immense.
Yeah.
And it's kind of heartbreaking to see how those pressures contributed to his struggles.
It's a reminder that even those who seem to have it all
Right.
can still face inner turmoil and, personal challenges.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that behind that image,
Yeah.
behind the music,
Yeah.
was a real person dealing with very real challenges.
So we've seen Elvis's rise, his impact, and these challenges that he faced.
Right.
But what's truly amazing is how his legacy continues to resonate decades after his death.
That's the power of a true icon.
Yeah.
His music continues to be discovered and rediscovered by new generations.
True.
His image remains instantly recognizable all over the world.
Uh-huh.
And his story continues to fascinate and inspire people.
Why do you think that is? What is it about Elvis that still captivates us all these years later?
I think it's a combination of things.
Okay, yeah.
There's the timeless quality of his music.
Yeah.
Right.
That raw emotion and energy
Mm-hmm.
that still connects with listeners today.
Yeah.
There's that rebellious spirit he embodied.
Right.
The idea of challenging conventions and living life on your own terms.
Right.
And there's just the fascination with his story,
Yeah.
The rags to riches arc,
Yeah.
the triumphs and the tragedies,
Right.
the complexities of fame and fortune.
It's like his life was like a microcosm of the American dream, like both its promise
Yeah.
and its potential pitfalls.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a story that continues to be relevant and relatable.
Right.
Even in a world that's so vastly different from the one that Elvis inhabited.
We've talked a lot about Elvis's like positive impact,
Sure.
but I think it's important to acknowledge
Yeah.
that there are criticisms and controversies that
Yeah.
kind of surround his legacy.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The issue of cultural appropriation is one that we can't ignore.
While Elvis helped to popularize black music, he also benefited from a system that often marginalized and exploited black artists.
Uh-huh.
It's a complex issue
Yeah.
with no easy answers,
Right.
and it's important to engage with it honestly and thoughtfully.
I think that's like a key takeaway from any deep dive.
I agree.
Is to look at these iconic figures with a critical eye,
Right.
acknowledging both their achievements
Yeah.
and, the complexities that surround them.
Absolutely.
So where do we go from here?
Sure.
We've explored Elvis's life, his music, his impact. What are some key insights we can take away from all of this?
Well, I think Elvis's story offers several important lessons.
Okay.
First, I think it reminds us of the power of authenticity.
Okay.
He was unapologetically himself,
Right.
and that resonated with millions of people around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it encourages us to embrace our individuality and express ourselves without being afraid of judgment.
That's such a powerful message, especially in a world that often pressures us to, conform.
I think so, too.
Yeah.
Second, Elvis's story highlights the transformative power of art.
Uh-huh.
His music transcended cultural barriers.
Yes.
It brought people together,
Yeah.
and it sparked a revolution.
Right.
It's a reminder that art can be a force for change,
Okay.
for connection,
Yeah.
and for self-expression.
And it shows how art can reflect, the social and cultural shifts happening around it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, Elvis's story, both the triumphs and the tragedies,
Mm-hmm.
reminds us that success and fame don't necessarily guarantee happiness.
Right.
It's a cautionary tale
Okay.
about the importance of staying true to yourself,
Right.
prioritizing your well-being,
Yeah.
and finding fulfillment beyond the trappings of material success.
That's a really important point. I think it's easy to get caught up in, the glamour
Yeah.
and forget that even icons are human.
It's true.
Right.
And Elvis's story is a reminder that true fulfillment comes from within,
Uh-huh.
from pursuing your passions,
Mm-hmm.
connecting with others,
Yeah.
and living a life that aligns with your values.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about, Elvis, the icon, the rebel, the cultural force.
Right.
What about, Elvis, the person?
Right.
Who was he when the spotlight faded?
I think that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
You have this incredibly charismatic performer who just owned the stage.
Mm-hmm.
But offstage, he could be surprisingly shy and introspective.
I've heard that he was, really devoted to his family and friends, almost to a fault.
Yeah, loyalty was paramount to him.
Okay.
He was known for his generosity, often showering loved ones with gifts.
Right.
But there's also this sense that he surrounded himself with people who kind of reinforced his views,
Yeah.
maybe making it a little bit harder for him to hear critical voices.
So the classic double-edged sword of fame.
Yeah,
Support, but maybe not always the kind that challenges you to grow.
exactly.
Okay.
And let's not forget his spiritual side. Elvis was raised on gospel music,
Mm-hmm.
and his faith remained important to him
Okay.
throughout his life.
Yeah.
Some argue that it kind of clashed with his rock and roll image,
Right.
while others saw it as a core part of who he was.
That tension between the sacred and the secular seems to run through a lot of his story.
It does.
Yeah, it makes you think about the different sides. We all have those internal conflicts that we navigate.
And how those conflicts might play out on a public stage.
Yeah.
When you're someone like Elvis.
Right, exactly.
And his later years were especially turbulent,
Okay.
marked by health issues,
Right.
addiction, and a growing sense of isolation.
Is it fair to say that the pressures of fame contributed to those struggles?
It's hard to imagine they didn't play a role.
Yeah.
That constant scrutiny, the demand to always be on,
Yeah.
the blurring of his public persona and his private life, it takes a toll.
It's a cautionary tale, kind of, about the dark side of fame.
Yeah.
That even those who seem to have it all
Can still be battling inner demons.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even in those darker times, his music still connected with people.
It's true.
It's a testament to his artistry
Uh-huh.
that even when he was struggling personally, his voice carried that raw emotion,
Yeah.
that vulnerability
Right.
that resonated with audiences.
So we've kind of unpacked Elvis's rise, his influence, his challenges, and his, like, enduring legacy.
We have.
What do you think is the most important thing for, like, our listeners to take away from all of this?
Well, I think Elvis's story ultimately reminds us that even the most iconic figures
Hmm.
are human.
Mhm.
With all the complexities and contradictions that come with being human,
Right.
it encourages us to look beyond the surface,
Okay.
to recognize the nuance and the depth in every story.
And to remember that those contradictions are often what makes someone's story so captivating.
Absolutely.
It's not about, like, fitting neatly into a box. It's about embracing the messiness of being alive.
Yeah.
And I hope our listeners are inspired to not only appreciate Elvis's music,
Uh-huh.
but to delve a little deeper into his story,
Okay.
to explore the context, the controversies, the different perspectives that make up his legacy.
Because that's the beauty of these deep dives, right?
I think so.
It's not about idolizing like these figures from the past.
Yeah.
It's about like engaging with their stories
Right.
in a thoughtful and critical way.
Absolutely. It's about understanding them as products of their time,
Yeah.
acknowledging their flaws,
Yeah.
celebrating their achievements, and ultimately, like, learning from the complexities of their lives.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today.
I know we have.
Exploring the life, the music, the impact, and the enduring legacy of Elvis Presley. It's been a fascinating journey into the world of a true icon.
It has. It's been a privilege to dive into the King's reign with you.
And to all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Elvis Presley. We hope you enjoyed the exploration and maybe even learned something new about the King of Rock and Roll. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the music playing.